Good day, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Energy Revolution. My name is David Seabrook. I'm the Business Line Director of Digital Sustainability here at SLB. And I'm thrilled today to be joined by Debbie Gordon. Debbie is Senior Principal at RMI, and she is author of No Standard Oil, a book that we will be discussing in a little bit of detail during the episode today. So, Debbie, welcome to sunny London. Maybe you can take a few moments just to tell us a little bit about your background, who you work for, and maybe why you're in London this week.
Oh, sure. Thank you, David. This is really a pleasure, actually. I'm in London for London Climate Action Week, several events next week. Hope to see you as well. And my journey for oil started so long ago. Who am I? I started as a chemical engineer for Chevron. And in those days, I thought oil was just oil. I didn't know that much about, what I was actually producing, quite honestly. And after 5 years in production, I moved over to the NGO community after getting my master's in public policy at Berkeley, because I was more interested in decision making, of how the decisions were made. I loved learning about oil. I grew up during the second oil crisis in America, getting my driver's license, waiting in line for gasoline. So it was really a big primer for, what is energy security and how are we going to get energy? And fast through my entire career, after many different NGOs, I came to the Carnegie Endowment for International Peace, which does more geopolitics. I ran their energy and climate program. And that's when I conceived of the book that we're going to talk about today. And after about a decade there, in 2020, I came to RMI. RMI is a really unusual NGO, a really unusual think tank. It is more about transforming global energy markets using market transformation to do that. So we're not, though I'm a policy person and I love policy, we're not looking always at regulation so much as we're looking at how markets drive decision making and change. And the goal is for a prosperous, clean, secure, resilient energy future for all.
Right. Excellent. Well, it's really good to be talking with you today, Debbie. I'm going to jump into with the first question. And I think the first question is really around the basis of your book, which really argues that treating oil and gas as a single uniform commodity actually hides the huge differences in the climate impact of these different barrels of oil. And can you maybe just unpack a little bit about that, that being the primary thesis, I guess?
Yeah. So, to set the stage, I was conceiving of this in about 2010. And this, remember, had started in my original oil experience. And what I was producing in California, I learned in 2010, like 30 years later, was unconventional oil, because California has very unconventional, heavy tar-like oil. But in 2010, it was about oil sands and fracking. And the US thought it was running out of oil. And my thesis was, if oil and gas are chemically and physically that different, then their societal impacts and their climate impacts must be really different. Yeah. So that was really the genesis of the thought. And we realized that there was an analytic way to evaluate that. So created what the book talks about, this oil climate index that goes through the engineering analysis of what it takes to take oil out of the ground and what it takes to refine it and to transport it and burn it through an entire life cycle. And that became, are these oils all going to come out looking the same? They're going in different. Are they going to look the same? Right. And if we found that there was like a 5x difference at that point in modeling about 25% of the world's oil and gas supplies, there was a 5x difference from low to high when you looked at the total emissions. Yeah. And I was like, that's big enough to matter.
Yeah. So Debbie, in your reply there, you mentioned 5x. Can you maybe just sort of expand a bit on what is in that 5x, please?
Yeah. So it turns out that the oil and gas industry is very energy intensive itself. It takes a lot of energy to pump oil out of the ground and heat it up and move it around and refine it, cleave it, turn it into product. And it depends on how that energy is met. Most of that energy today is diesel and natural gas. Sometimes even the dirtiest part of the barrel, like petroleum coke. But some resources are just natural. For example, Saudi Arabia, very large pools of oil under a certain amount of pressure takes very little to take them out of the ground. Exactly. And so then you get, or you'll have an acid gas that has a lot of carbon dioxide and trained in it, and you have to remove it, and then you have to make sure that you don't release into the atmosphere, which it largely does today. So these natural differences in the kind of in the geologic and the makeup of these and the way oil and gas are stored lead to very different emission footprints that can be as wide-ranging from high to low as 5x.
It's amazing. You wouldn't think it would be such a big difference, but I can see how it can be. Yeah, exactly. Thank you.
Sure.
And it's very interesting to think of oil and gas not just as the end product, but something that has an entire life before it reaches the end user. And I think that's what you've captured in the book. I want to step back and ask you a question, maybe a bit more generically around oil and gas, but what do you think today is the biggest misconception people have, including maybe policymakers or energy leaders, about oil and gas and its role in the energy transition? I think we know it's going to be part of any energy mix for the foreseeable future. So what is that biggest misconception from your perspective, Debbie?
Yeah, I mean, everything about it's my world started with air pollution. Because in the 80s, it was much more about air pollution and climate change.
Right.
But I think what the policymakers got wrong when they realized that there was going to be a concern with climate change is it all became about carbon dioxide. That was the only gas that mattered. It is the longest lived gas. So once you have it in the atmosphere, it's going to live for a century. It's a long time. But I think the biggest misconception that we're really grappling with now is methane.
Right.
Methane is a very potent, fast-reacting gas. But what makes methane so different than CO2 is it's a commodity. Methane is gas. Like if you don't waste it, you actually can sell it. Yeah. CO2 maybe someday we'll be able to sell, but right now we have to capture it and just store it. So they both are very important, but I think the missing link for those last 3 decades or so that held us back was not realizing that methane was so important.
Yeah, which kind of goes to understanding that there's value in addressing this problem. It's not just a problem, but there's actually economic value in the less you emit, the more you can sell.
Yeah.
So, very good. So, Debbie, you've spoken about regulating oil by design instead of by default, and maybe you can share a bit about what does that actually mean? What does that look like? And how will that change the trajectory of the energy transition if we actually start looking at it by design?
Yeah. Maybe it's because where I went. After Chevron, I decided, this is being very honest, I decided that I probably knew enough to hurt myself. After 5 years of working at Chevron, I thought, I know somewhat about what oil is, at that point, not much about gas. It was really a waste, an unwanted byproduct. So I ended up working in transportation policy for much of my career, and then shifted back in 2010 when everything was really changing for oil and gas. And I think that the default of a lot of our policy and a lot of our decision making had been consumer-based. Drive less, use less, buy an electric car. It was all about the consumer. And the design to me was, this is a supply chain. Like you were saying before, there's like a before, during, and after of this entire barrel. And I was really interested in how the industry itself weighed into the decision making, and differentiating these barrels of oil and gas mattered so much. And I thought if we could involve the industry more in this, that they weren't just standard oil. They weren't just posing as like, we do one thing. Everything's gasoline. Don't worry about it. We got it under control. And we understood the full barrel and everything that's in it, and where the different barrels had higher or lower emissions, that we could really change the entire supply chain.
Debbie, obviously for people to make better decisions, people to manage by design, they need data. They need to understand what production looks like, data around productions, around intensity, about transportation. So as you work at RMI and the OCI Plus, how important has data been in that journey? And maybe could you just share a little bit about the importance of data in this design management process?
Data is number one. I mean, that's my take on it. What we do with data becomes very important, but without that information, it's basically you can't manage what you can't measure. That's long been what I've seen of the world. And I'm seeing actual evidence of that all over the place. So the satellites are launching now. They can spot super emitter methane, super emitter CO2. They can do area-wide fluxes. Different satellites can see a whole entire area and carpet and add up the methane. This is like such incredible data. And when you merge it in with the models, the Oil Climate Index plus gas, the OCI Plus, you end up with both a look at what's normal or routine and what's not. And it's somewhat eye-opening. We're finding from just the first year, going on a year of the Carbon Mapper satellite, which is seeing super-emitting methane especially, that what we're just now seeing is that on average about 25% of the methane emissions are not routine. We don't see them in the model.
Right.
They're coming out as super emitters, so events, things that are happening. But that's really important information for the industry and what SLB can bring to the industry to stop that as well. You don't want any waste to be routine.
Yeah.
You'd rather
Yeah.
sell it, right?
Yeah,
You don't want to
exactly.
waste it. And then there's, with the data, we have certification through MIQ. We're getting voluntary certification of companies. I think it was BP, self-certified through this open source nonprofit MIQ, all of their domestic onshore oil and gas in the US. So data is essential there. They're going to the facility and actually measuring really low, grading and measuring really low, like below 0.2% methane leakage, which is amazing. I do think even like the scope 3 work, the conversation that's going on now, in Europe especially. So the Oil Climate Index takes that barrel and it says, how much energy and emissions does it take to get it out of the ground? How much energy emissions to transport and refine it? But then when you get what comes out of that type of oil, and different things come out of different oils, these are the emissions that are scope 3. So it can even differentiate scope 3 emissions, because from an extra heavy oil, you're going to get a very different type of product than from an ultralight oil or a sour gas.
Right. And I guess this focus on methane again and these super emitters, the global warming potential of methane is so huge and so impactful, especially over the short term, that addressing those can actually make a material impact to the industry's responsibility, right, in terms of climate action.
Yeah. So I don't think many people understand. I've worked enough with now NASA and different, space scientists and atmosphere chemists to understand. So the atmosphere is obviously very complicated, but CO2 is almost like the bathtub filling up with water, and that will change the long-term temperature of the planet. And it's going to be very hard to stop that because we're loading. It's like you can't, like if you take a little cup and try to empty a bathtub, it's going to take you or teaspoon, take you a very long time. But methane is so important, though it lives only for a decade. It's very short-lived. It's very important because it has about 80 times the potency of heating the planet as CO2. And so it's changing the rate of warming. So we're warming a lot more quickly than we thought we would. At this point, it's a double-edged sword. The terrible news is that we're having more climate disasters, but we're also seeing changes in the climate now, which make it much harder to deny. Whereas years ago, when you're talking about CO2 and waiting 100 years for temperatures to get really, really, really bad, it was hard. Policy acts quickly, and you need to see things, and that's where data comes back in. You see the numbers, you see the evidence, you can react.
And you can take action, right?
Exactly.
So Debbie, I think maybe to a question that maybe is at the heart of this discussion is that, methane will be managed through policy. Methane will be managed through voluntary policy, through obligated policy. All of this will come, but there's also a business case for creating a lower carbon barrel of oil. And that business case today may seem neither here nor there, but I think in the long term, as supply exceeds demand, having the lowest carbon barrel of oil through the full embodied carbon process is going to differentiate that product. And people will not only be asking about the price per barrel, but the carbon per barrel. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, because I see that driving the industry in the long term.
Yeah, I think it really works to the benefit of the industry. The industry is very competitive. So if you find something else besides price, which will always be a determinant, but if you find something else besides price to compete on, you're going to have better actors out there, and they're going to gravitate and want to compete on those grounds. The idea of having different emissions intensities of equivalent barrels means that there's so much competitive edge in this industry to do business better. And that's been the premise of really all of this work. There's the sense of like, I think it was IEA has actually published this, but I actually went, put pen to paper with their most recent OCI Plus, and I actually did this analysis myself and saw that if and this won't happen this way, but just an if all of the world's oil and gas was produced with the lowest intensity, like what Norway produces right now, for example, we could reduce methane 90%.
Wow.
from the oil and gas industry.
That's
Now,
huge.
some will lean into competition, some won't, but there's a market out there. The other funny thing I always think about as a real basic comparison, a cereal aisle.
Right.
So you walk down the aisle, and if there was only one cereal, you'd have no choice. And the oil industry doesn't want to be that. They don't want to be the only barrel out there.
Right.
It doesn't play to every company's advantage. So you have cereals that have high fiber. You have cereals that have high protein now. You have cereals that have low sugar.
Yeah.
There's a lot to choose from. And this becomes, from oil and gas, a multiplier effect. Because if we can, as we use less oil and gas, as the vehicles electrify and things change, and we put more oil into, not burning oil, but put it into materials, then we want to use less of the most intensive barrels, because that's a multiplier effect for all that we're trying to do. So it's a win-win.
Yeah. So I mean, starting now in a journey to create a competitive barrel of oil from a carbon perspective will create competitive advantage in the future.
Absolutely.
For oil and gas companies.
Absolutely. And I do think some will lean in faster than others. But for an SLB that really has this kind of a digital vision of how to do this, it means that you're there to keep, as a business prospect, to show this. As some companies will come or go. That's just the nature of any industry. But I think you're always going to have a market.
Yeah, great. So I want to do some blue sky thinking with you. If you could shift one mindset in the energy sector tomorrow, what would it be, and what do you think it could change if you could just make magic wand, shift a mindset?
I'm really, and I have a new afterword in the paperback version of No Standard Oil that's coming out this summer. I'm really, and the new afterword is on gas and methane.
Right.
Because the book was on, much of it was oil and gas. Because the industry had been oil and gas. I think this industry is becoming a gas and oil industry. And I really believe that the blue sky thinking has to be about methane and the commodity that it is, and not viewing it in a very 20th century way of like a waste byproduct. I think the world has totally changed, and it's going to grow. So we're going to have to really deal with not leaking. Every bit of gas that is, that is produced has to make it into a pipeline.
With that, I want to say thank you very much for chatting to me this afternoon. It's been always insightful to talk with you, and thank you for the book as well. I look forward to the paperback version coming out soon. So thank you, everybody, for joining us for today's episode of Energy Revolutions. I've enjoyed, Debbie, you being here and talking with us today. I think if Debbie has made one thing very clear to us, it's the importance of addressing methane in our industry. And that is something that is within our capabilities, both technically and economically and commercially, and that there's a real business opportunity to use a decarbonized barrel of oil as a differentiator and business opportunity for the future. So I hope you've enjoyed this discussion, and we look forward to seeing you on future episodes of Energy Revolution. Thank you.